ran up a check, I might do it again. Enemies close, had me thinking they're friends. 10 toes down, I'll be free until the end. Crib outside the city, I don't feel safe in my hands. Took so many years, I'm just waiting for the wins. I'm in debt to no one but the one who took my sins. I do it for real, there's no reason to pretend. If I do it once, I do it again. Add it up, bankroll, euro, peso, add it up, I'm just doing me, everything is on me, oh, you matter what. Add it up, bankroll, euro, peso, add it up, I'm just doing me, everything is on me, oh, you matter what. Add it up, told her if it's all me, everything is on me, gon' back it up. Matter what, told you I'ma do me, why you hating on me, it's not adding up. I do roll like a Mack truck, country heart, I might cop a farm and go act up. Lot of scars, I was cold-hearted, now I'm back up. Keep it real, I do this once a month, I don't rap much. I just take the money and go stack up.
Good evening, good evening, good evening. What's up, Savannah? How you doing? This is Julius Campbell. We are here tonight, Ink to Ink, Incarceration to Incorporation. We are excited. Another Friday, an opportunity to come before you and just candidly have conversation. We want you to know, what do we do at Ink to Ink? Well, basically, we're changing the narrative. So often, many people think that when a returning citizen gets out of prison, that they automatically go back. But that is not true. That is not the case. There are many of us that are successful in our own rights, whether it is relationally, organizationally, occupationally, or educationally. Many of us are successful. We may have started out wrong, but look at us now. We are finishing strong. And so we want to provide a platform for returning citizens, for relatives of returning citizens, and also for resources for returning citizens. Why? Because when they get that platform and they share their story, it helps them to know that they can make it too. We encourage, we educate, and we empower. We often talk to you about OAA, Offender Alumni Association Savannah. And we do what? We provide a safe space for men and women to share their stories. Because if they realize that Julius Hall can make it, Julius Campbell can make it, Marie Jones can make it, then they themselves are motivated and know that they can make it also. Julius Hall often says to us that a debt once paid is no longer a debt. Well, we are here to change the perception of returning citizens. So what do? I want to give a shout out, first of all, to Marie Jones, our co-host, and also to AB, the brainchild of what we're talking about tonight, Ink to Ink, and also, of course, Julius Hall and ATR Media. Without this, we will not be able to come before you and change the narrative. So we are starting out tonight. We got a special guest, and I'm going to allow him to introduce himself. Judge Huffman is going to tell us who he is. But before you do that, just want to give a shout out. What's up, Judge? How you doing tonight?
What's up? I am exhausted, but I'm good. You know, there's an election coming up. We're down into the last 2 weeks, so I am excited and ready to speak it into existence. So thank you, Julius, for allowing me to come on your platform and provide whatever information that I can to share my story, to give my background, and answer any questions that you might have.
Awesome. So I'm going to preface this conversation. This is a candid conversation with the judge. Many of us returning citizens wish we had an opportunity to sit down before a judge and just simply ask questions. And not just ask questions, but also to allow them to hear our stories. And so what we're going to do tonight, we're going to give Judge Huffman a platform to first tell us a little bit about who you are and what pushed you to this career change. Oh, well, not career change, but pathway.
So, Joe Huffman, I'm a Savannah native. I'm a product of the public school system here, Windsor Elementary, Durham Middle School, Savannah High School, finished up at the Arts Academy. After undergrad, came back. I actually became a police officer here with my brother. That reignited my interest in law, serving the community in that way. I wanted to do more, so I went to law school, Georgia State University. So I got my law degree and Master of Public Administration from the Andrew Young School of Policy Studies at the same time, came back, and ever since I've been continuing to serve the community in a variety of legal roles as a defense attorney, a prosecutor, a guardian ad litem, and I've actually been a judge for the last three or 4 years. I've sat as a judge in 6 different courts: Garden City Municipal Court, Pooler Municipal Court, Port Wentworth Municipal Court, Bryan County State Court on a pro tem basis, Chatham County Juvenile Court on a pro tem basis, even all the way up to Ludowici Municipal Court. I've presided on approximately 91 different occasions, hearing over 7,000 different hearings, proceedings, from bond hearings, initial appearances, preliminary hearings, motion hearings, and bench trials. Everything other than a jury trial I have presided over as a judge. And so with that broad, comprehensive background and experience and history of service to this community that produced me, I've decided to run for judge of Chatham County Recorder's Court. Chief Judge Tammy Stokes is moving on to the Superior Court of Chatham County, leaving open a seat, and I am vying to be elected to fill that seat. Recorder's Court, it's traffic court, right? What people say, what is Recorder's Court? Well, it's traffic court, and it deals also with criminal matters only. So Recorder's Court can dispose and resolve all misdemeanors. Misdemeanors carry, less than 12 months and less in jail, up to $1,000 in fines, or both. And some misdemeanors carry up to $5,000 in fines. But Recorder's Court can also touch on felony cases on a preliminary, in a preliminary way. Most felony matters can have bonds set in Recorder's Court, and you can have preliminary hearings. The most serious things, such as murder, armed robbery, rape, and a class of other serious felonies, can't be considered for bond in Recorder's Court, but Recorder's Court can have a preliminary hearing for all cases as long as the case hasn't been indicted yet. Why am I seeking this this next stage of trying to serve the community? Recorder's Court is a full-time position, and what I currently do as a judge is on a part-time basis in conjunction with my work as a defense attorney advocating for people's rights and advocating for children. There's an opportunity to take the experience that I've developed, the educations I've gained, and put that into practice, put that into use. 2007 is when I started serving this community. That's 15 years ago. I started trying to find ways to do my part. I always give this analogy. Sometimes it loses people. So I know how to change a tire. Always have. Growing up, my brother and I, we knew how to change tires. And so when we would see people on the side of the road when we drove by needing, changing their own tire, we'd hop out and we'd help. There's nothing worse than being by yourself having to change your own tire. So we jump out and help. And so the bottom line is there's a tire that needs to be changed in Recorder's Court. And I know how to do it. So I'm going to jump in there and try to do my best to make that happen. And I would not be doing my part if I didn't at least try to get elected to Recorder's Court judge, giving everything, right? I'm not a divorce attorney. I haven't only been a prosecutor. I haven't only done one aspect of law. Not that there's anything wrong with only practicing in one area of law, right? But I've done it all. I haven't just done one. And because of that, that makes me uniquely positioned for this job. There's no debate. So it's an opportunity for me to do my part. I want to do my part, and that's why I'm trying to get elected.
All right. So thank you. First of all, I'm glad you cleared it up. What is Recorder's Court? And then you gave us the information that we need to know about your track record. And thank you for your service to the community. As a matter of fact, I want to use that word, community. When you talk about service to the community, are you talking about the entire community? Because I really said that because sometimes there are a few who don't feel like they are a part of the community. And so what do you think about that when you hear returning citizens? They feel as if they are second-class citizens, not a part of this community, when in all actuality, after they have done time, as if they were told to do, they were reintegrated back into society. As Julius Hall said, a debt once paid is no longer a debt. So should they not now be a part of that one community?
So when I say the word community, I mean neighbor, right?
Okay.
I'm somebody's neighbor. Joe Huffman, me. I don't want to talk in the third person. I am somebody's neighbor.
Mhm.
You, Julius Campbell, are somebody's neighbor. Everybody in our geographical location is a neighbor to someone else. And so when I say community, I'm talking about my neighbor. I'm talking about your neighbor, because your neighbor could be me and my neighbor could be you. And so as a judge, just like I do as a defense attorney, just like I did as a prosecutor, just like I do as a child advocate, and just like I did as a police officer, when I encountered individuals in all of those different areas, in my mind is that this is somebody's neighbor. And more than likely, possibly it could be my neighbor. So I'll just take it from a judge perspective, since I'm trying to be elected as a judge. When you talk about issues of bond, for example, because that's a hot button issue, that's not necessarily addressed with returning citizens, but in a way it's still applicable. What can we as a society in whole expect from our neighbors if we don't expect it from ourselves? And what we expect from ourselves is to be respectful to others. What we expect from ourselves is to respect the rights of others as our neighbors. And so we would hope that we would have respect for others, or expectation for others to have respect for us. And as long as we have those expectations, and as long as we have that mindset, we're going to find success. We have to get out of the mindset of us versus them, because we are all us
Yes.
and we are all them. We all have different backgrounds. I'm not saying that somebody who has paid their debt to society is not different than someone who didn't have to do that. There are realities of life. However, we're in the now. And so how do we deal with the now other than to have respect and dignity for one another? And as long as that respect and dignity is present, then there's no reason to have any other mentality of, what's up, neighbor? What can I do for you? Right? What can you do for me? How can we respect each other? How can we be productive? Nobody wants to live with a neighbor that's a horrible neighbor, just like nobody wants to be a horrible neighbor. So when you say the word community, I think the word neighbor, because again, you're somebody's neighbor, I'm somebody's neighbor, and regardless of the backgrounds, that is first and foremost. So
I love that.
that's when
I
I
love
say
it.
community, that's what I talk about.
I love the word respect, especially when you say everybody wants to be respected. I love that. And when I talk, I'm talking balance. When I say, when I'm talking to you, I know you're speaking individually of yourself, but I also want you to tell us from the perspective of corrections, because am I right in saying that you've been in corrections for a long time? So that is basically the I guess the predominance of your mindset, right? Is
I
it
would say, go ahead.
is it difficult for you to sometimes be intentional about thinking from the perspective of those that have come home from incarceration and the plight that they now share?
So I don't understand what that reality is, having not experienced it personally, but I understand that reality having experienced it and representing individuals. Look, I have never had to go serve a 10-year sentence before, right? I haven't had to do that, but I have looked people in the eyes who are about to go do that. And I've had to look their mothers in the eyes after they've been sent and talk to them, right? That doesn't negate the need for that to happen, but it does give an understanding of the effect that has on the person themselves going, and to the family and loved ones of those who did not go. And so I have not had to experience going, but I have seen the aftermath of who's left, and when those return, the adjustments and the difficulties that can be in place. So um, it's not an experience that I can say from having done it, but it is an experience of being around those who have. So is it hard for me to put my mindset on that? It's not necessarily hard, but I do think about it consciously. Otherwise, I would be remiss to be overlooking it, right? So it's something you have to keep in your mind. I also it's an argument I make when I go to court for or advocating for in the basic premise of returning citizens. I tell judges as an attorney, look, this person, this individual, this human being will return. Unless it's a life sentence, they will return. What are we, the court system, the community, the neighbors, what are we hoping upon return that this individual, this human being would have gained to make them be a good neighbor to us and we can be a good neighbor to them? So, like I said, although I haven't had to experience the going away, I've experienced everything else. And that gives me good perspective, I think, in having this discussion.
And you're right. And I love the word I use, intentionality, because first of all, I just want to put this out here. When we do wrong, there are consequences. So I want to make sure that that is clear. I am not negating the consequences of breaking the law. So I wanted to set that straight. However, I do want to look at two things. Number one is there has to be some sort of communication with the community and corrections. And I say that because a lot of people that are incarcerated right now, their families don't understand legal issues. They don't understand it. And so you have people that are inside the prison system right now that have been there for a long time. And statistics have proven that those who have done a greater amount of time are less likely to offend or re-offend, if you will. And yet it still seems like it's difficult for prisons to open the door for them. So my question to you is this. What is your thought process on mass incarceration?
So my thought process on mass incarceration is that it's a difficult issue. The Supreme Court of Georgia, I know the Chief Judge had commentary on this not too long ago. Chief Judge Melton, I think he is no longer with the court, having moved on. But he gave a talk as to a lot of individuals incarcerated are incarcerated for serious offenses. I mean, one, it's prison, not jail. So if it's prison, that means it's a felony. So if it's a felony, that means it's deemed by the community and the legislature. When I say community in this way, I mean individuals who voted legislator in, they passed laws signed by the governor, that there would be more, quote, harsh consequences for those offenses. There's a balance of offenses that carry consequences, such as nonviolent drug offenses can result, depending on a myriad of factors, in long prison sentences. And there are also financial crimes that can have long prison sentences. Those are separate and apart really from physically violent offenses. The large number of physically violent offenses that are prosecuted and convicted in the state, if that's the basis of a number of individuals incarcerated, I mean, quite frankly, that's just the number of people who've been arrested and found guilty or pled guilty and who are in prison. Recidivism is a real thing, right? Recidivism, having repeat offenders, quote, repeat offenders, individuals who get out having previously been incarcerated or convicted, who then reoffend, that's a real issue. And so mass incarceration is made worse mostly because of recidivism. Because if the only people who were in prison were the first time they ever went there, we probably wouldn't have as many numbers in there, right? And so because it would be the first time they were there, and if they never came back, the mass incarceration would be much less. And so then the question begs of, why is there recidivism? Is it purely there are other factors, right? When it comes to drugs, are there addiction issues that then lead to other issues? Are there systemic issues in the community that are there issues with peer associations, right? There's a lot of reasons that can lead to mass incarceration, but the number one cause of mass incarceration is recidivism, repeat offenders. And so you then have to, as a community, as neighbors, ask ourselves, what are things that can be put into place to help me help you, right? there is no magic answer to solve recidivism, but I do know that there are things in place in our community that cause barriers that are not helpful. And that's not an excuse. That does not negate people of responsibility for their actions. However, it's a reality. It is a reality that there are barriers that then lead to further incidents of recidivists. So, as to mass incarceration, what do I think about it? One, I think it's a huge issue. I think that there are bound to be ways that we can get creative with dealing with it. It's simple just to lock people up who commit crime, quote, commit crime, right? I mean, it's a very, when I say simple, it's simple on the person sending those away. It's not simple on the individuals having to go. Again, and to your point earlier, talking about this issue, talking about mass incarceration and recidivism is in no way an endorsement that people should not be held accountable for conduct. That is not, I don't think I get that from your questions, and I'm not trying to portray that in my answer. But when trying to have a discussion as to why something exists, there has to be an acknowledgement that what we're doing and what's going on isn't working, right? Does that mean that there needs to be a change on the people doing the sentencing? Maybe in some regards, yes. There's definitely got to be a change on the people doing the committing, right? But it's not a one, like, you can't just be learn your lesson, do better, right? That's not the only answer. And quite frankly, that's a lazy answer, because what is prohibiting that person from doing better, right? Are there things that can be done to help me, help you?
Well, you
So,
said
I
it
mean,
right there. If I can interrupt you
go ahead.
respectfully, you said it right there. I did a TED talk that and we're going to have this talk to see if you finish watching it. Nevertheless, there were three components there that we talked about as it relates to mass incarceration. You hinted on two of them. Recidivism was one, and substance abuse was another one. But there are two others that we find that just practical and real, and that is mental health conditions and money. But now we're not going to debate those four issues. However, you said something that I definitely agreed with, that there needs to be something done on both sides of the table, those that are committing and then those that are sentencing. And so that's why I brought the word mass incarceration up to you. So I want to be intentional and individual. You yourself, well, Alpha X, what are you doing, or what do you look to do if you are elected to help to change the trajectory of what's going on? Because you're right. If we don't do something about it, and it's going to get worse. So are you familiar with the term reentry?
Yes.
All right. What is, so two-part question, and you can continue on. What are you going to do practically and intentionally to, when you get in that space, to change things? And reentry, what do you think about reentry and what it's doing right now to help?
So as recorder's court judge, there are, again, we can't dispose in that court as a judge of felonies, right? So, there's a lot of discussion in our community about, quote, rampant crime and out of control crime. There's a false narrative that you can't walk down the street without something bad happening. I mean, are bad things happening in the community? Yes. Bad things have been happening in the community, not the last year, not the last 2 years, the last 30 years. If you look at the numbers, violent crime in Savannah is cyclical, right? It ebbs and flows. And with all due respect to everybody involved, that has little to do with enforcement policies and more to do with just groups of individuals growing up. There's violence, and then there's incarceration, and then there's another wave a couple years later of another group in this community specifically. But so as a judge, to address reentry and to address what can be done. So to go back to one of the things you said, mental health, there is a prevalence of trauma in our community. Ultimately, my work with Chatham County Juvenile Court, working with kids, I would come across kids at 15, 16 years old who, at the age of 5 and 6, experience levels and kinds of trauma that in my 40 years I've never experienced. And so there are grown adults who can't handle some stressful situations, and yet there are children who go through issues of homelessness, who go through issues of violence, who go through issues of witnessing addiction in a variety of ways that manifests and ultimately it's trauma. Post-traumatic stress disorder, is a lot of things that soldiers get in war. Kids are experiencing trauma. Kids have this trauma that they've experienced. It goes undiagnosed, untreated, and then it develops into personality traits that lends itself to just being impulsive thinking, impulsive actions, not being able to control one's long-term plans. And so it's not an answer that answers it's not an answer that addresses everything, but in our community, in our society, we've got, and especially in Savannah, we've got to get better at addressing issues of trauma at an earlier age. So what can I do as a recorder's court judge, right? So again, if it's an issue where I can give bond, if somebody is charged with aggravated assault, gets out on bond, and gets another charge for aggravated assault, I can't, as a recorder's court judge, consider bond for that. I cannot grant bond. It's a waste of time to say that I can. And any person who's running around town saying that they're gonna stop crime in its tracks as a recorder's court judge is lying, right? They're not telling the truth. Because a judge, I'm running to be judge. I'm not running to be Batman. Okay, I am trying to deal with the cases that come into court on an individual basis. And what you can do as a judge is you can get creative with figuring out the person's history, what's going on, right? Obviously, there's a responsibility to ensure that someone is not a significant risk of threat of harm or committing violence or to a witness or to flee. But if you determine that someone's not a significant risk and you are going to grant bond, as a judge, how can you address reentry issues? Well, you start getting creative with bond conditions and having, all right, you're not just going to pay a $5,000 bond and go back into the community. You're going to pay a bond and then you're going to comply with these 4 things. For example, in federal court, I represent people in federal court. When someone is released pre-trial in federal court, there is a litany of conditions these individuals have to comply with. It's almost like being on probation before you're even convicted, right? If you even get convicted. And so that's a lot of resources, but the federal system, in my experience, does well by itself with having that system. So at a recorder's court level, if there's a way to develop an ability to have better compliance with bond conditions, you will find that issues of quote recidivism or rearrest for new offenses will go lower. Because one, the person being granted bond in recorder's court, if they can get bond, will be someone who's appropriate for bond. And two, they'll have conditions on them that's not just, again, paying money and getting out. There's some accountability for it. So in that role as a recorder's court judge to deal with issues of reentry, that's how you can help put guardrails on people getting back into the community, getting back into society, even though they haven't been convicted of anything yet. This is still America. You're not a criminal until you're convicted of something, even if people believe you did something. So it's inappropriate for a judge to call somebody who's been arrested for something a criminal. A criminal is somebody who's been convicted. Again, this is America. Wild concept that you're innocent until proven guilty. And I'm not trying to be dismissive. It's just I hear these narratives in our community, and we seem to lose track of the fact, of reality that we have rights, right? And if you are a significant threat, then you don't get out of jail. But if you're not, you should, pending the outcome of your case, not willy-nilly, but with conditions in place to assure that you'll be compliant, which will ultimately help people with reentry. If you tell somebody, I'm gonna let you out of jail, but you got to come back next week and show me proof you've applied to 2 jobs. And if they come back the next week and they haven't, and they know they're going to go to jail, more than likely, they're going to come back showing they've applied for 2 jobs. Maybe they get one of those jobs, right? Or if you get out, I'm going to let you out on bond, and you're going to have to come back in 7 days. And when you come back, you have to show me proof that you've had an anger management evaluation. If you don't, I'm going to revoke your bond, right? You set up strict parameters, and you hold people accountable. And what does that do? I'm not trying to say we babysit adults, but clearly something's going on potentially where there needs to be more involvement. And I have no problem getting involved. right? So that's a lot of words to hopefully answer that question.
And you did. And I see something that we have agreement on, the narrative. These false, willy-nilly, in your word, narratives that are out there. We have a passion for changing. And so let me ask you another question, because there are so many places that we can go. But I want to go ask you about two more questions. I won't keep you too long. But sentencing, can you help me to understand, in my ignorance, help me to understand why sentencing is so, I guess, inconsistent. I'm sorry. One person, they get a certain uh, crime, and another person, whether it's an ethics or racial or status, for finances, same crime but different time. And am I right in saying that this is prevalent in America?
At the So I can talk as to two systems, right? I can talk to the federal system and I can talk to the state system of Georgia. I know in the federal system, they developed the United States sentencing guidelines that used to be mandatory. Now they're just suggestive. And that's a combination of evaluating someone's criminal history with someone's charges to which they've either been found to be guilty by a jury or pled guilty. And then there's a computation after you take a series of factors into account, which provides a range of months someone would have to serve. And that gave and it's given some sense of consistency to sentencing at the federal level. At the state level, the only thing that's consistent in the state level is that there are mandatory minimums for some offenses, and there are maybe it's 10 years for armed robbery, or it's life without the possibility of parole, or life with the possibility of parole for some other capital offenses. And so the reason for disparity in sentencing in our system, at least in the state of Georgia, comes down to judges, right? Every judge is an individual person, and every individual person has individual thoughts and beliefs and ideas. And so for Georgia, you would hope and desire that they will be consistent. And usually, so there's inconsistency between judges, but there's generally consistency with one judge, right? So one judge is consistent on things for themselves. They consistently make these decisions about these kinds of cases. Another judge will be inconsistent with that judge, but consistent with themselves, about the types of cases. So there is inconsistency between judges, between crimes, but there is generally consistency within those judges. And it doesn't mean that the judges are wrong. It just means that they might not be consistent with one another. And quite frankly, a good judge might not be consistent based on the crime alone, right? But they might be consistent with the crime combined with the background of the individual. So someone convicted of armed robbery in one case might have gotten 10 years, the minimum, and someone else, first time for armed robbery, might have gotten 20 years to serve. And you might look at it and say, that's crazy inconsistent, but you got to look at the facts. Why did the judge make that ruling on the 10 years versus the 20 years? And more often than not, there will be a good reason. Again, but that's consistency with the one judge. Judges are human beings, and judges don't always get it right. I don't always get it right. I do my best. But I know that every judge I've ever encountered has tried their best to get it right. At least the ones every judge I've encountered, I can say, has tried to do their best. Whether or not I've agreed with it, it's their decision. So when it comes to inconsistency, it exists in this country. And that inconsistency is due to the involvement of human beings, which I'm not saying we should get rid of human beings as judges, because I don't think that's the right answer. But there could be a development in the state system, to take some kind of similar approach the United States sentencing guidelines has. But I know that a lot of attorneys would be against that probably.
So as we get ready to close out, let me ask you this, and then I want you to speak a word of encouragement to our audience, especially to returning citizens. It's Judge, I don't know if you know that I myself have been incarcerated. I did actually 26 years on a life sentence. And it was grace, I know, that allowed me to be where I am today. But it's also proof that people change. Again, we may have started out wrong, but when given the opportunity, we can finish strong. And there are many more, if you will, Juliuses that are incarcerated, looking and waiting for an opportunity to show that they are changed. But nevertheless, I want to ask you a few series of quick uh, gunshot questions. Do you believe that returning citizens are, by and large, welcome back to society by the community and by the employers?
So I got a phone call right when you were asking that question. I rejected it, so I didn't hear it all. I apologize. Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
All right. And it's gonna be quick. Do you
Okay.
believe that returning citizens are, um, when they come home, do you think that they are treated fairly as the community or as second class citizens to the community and or employers?
It depends on the community. Some communities and some sectors of the community embrace, citizens re-entering society with open arms, and some don't, and that comes down to, a variety of factors. But so I guess the lawyerly answer is it depends, right? I think that there are sectors of the community that do a phenomenal job of, I can't endorse one company over another, but there are companies out there that do a really good job, and there are businesses that look out for their neighbors, and then there are some who don't, and that's unfortunate.
So what about, you do know that the fastest growing homeless population is returning citizens. One reason because often they are denied housing because of their background. Can you speak to that? Are you aware of that?
I actually was not aware that that was the largest or fastest growing segment of population. I would not be surprised though if there was not some strong correlation with mental health issues with that as well.
Okay. And I guess the last thing I would say, and then I want you to close us out with a word of encouragement to returning citizens, is do you think that there is a world where we being returning citizens, can come to the table along with corrections to help to make solutions versus correction making all the solutions without the sensitivities of what's going on in their answers? Did you understand my question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that world exists, and I think that when we realize that world exists, we'll be better for it. Um, so, you said something in the very beginning, and I've heard it before, and I agree with it. A debt once paid is no longer a debt. You can't have it both ways. You can't say that someone was convicted and sentenced to prison and gotten out, but yet they still have a sentence to serve. I mean, just keep them in prison, because if you agree that people don't have to spend a life sentence for something, even if they've been convicted, you acknowledge that at some point their time is done. And once their time is done, that individual, it's time for something else. And that something else, I think I just lost power where I'm at. That time for something else needs to be acknowledged. I mean, you can't have it both ways. Either people need to be convicted of a crime and go to prison forever for every crime, or we have to acknowledge that once individuals are done with in custody sentences, that they're done with they're done with their sentence. And so coming back, realizing that that's not a prevalent view, corrections, corrections would do themselves a bit of good. Everybody would do themselves a bit of good if we could find a way to come together to say, quite frankly, the group who you accuse of reoffending are trying to go to prison. And then the people receiving offenders can say, we are tired of receiving you after you've offended. Let's come together, right? Again, none of this absolves the issues or circumstances where some individuals just don't seem to get it and just continue to violate the law, right? This is not we can all hug it out, and once every single person, is going to forever follow the law. I mean, that's just not reality. But quite frankly, it's illogical and lazy to assume that, every person who's been convicted of a felony has no future. And I think there's a prevalence of people who think that to be true, and that's unfortunate.
Okay. So share with us, in closing words, encourage returning citizens, those that have returned home and they are trying, yet they are running into that wall of resistance. Encourage them from a judge perspective and from a individual perspective.
Keep trying. You know, you can't fail if you don't try. And at some point, you'll stop failing if you keep trying. Um, you know, again, I've never had to deal with the situation of having a felony conviction on my record. But I know that I've met some individuals that have given me inspiration because I've never, power came back on. They didn't give up, right? And they found a way to get creative. And what I would say to re-entering citizens is to maximize the use of technology, right? That is the gateway to the future. Technology, education, and the ability to not give up. When you have those three things and make use of those three things, you will find success. And the best part about America, I mean, literally the best part about America, is the ability to continue to try. So don't give up. And I know that there are resources out there. There's probably not enough resources. And so find those who've been successful and find out how they've been successful. Reach out to Julius Campbell. How in the world has Julius Campbell been able to do what he's been doing? Well, he's very educated. It doesn't appear that he's ever given up, and he's made use of technology, right? Now, Julius Hall may struggle with technology sometimes, I say jokingly. But as someone else who hasn't given up. And again, at some point you gotta let folks move on, right? They've done their time. It doesn't mean you have to like everybody, but there are people out there that don't like people who haven't done anything. So just what I would say for hope is find those who have been successful, find out what they did to do it, and I guarantee it'll be a combination of one of those three: never giving up, educating themselves, and finding the use of technology. And to go back to a question you said previously, the way you can avoid disparity in how you sentence people as a judge is you treat people equally, equal justice under the law. And good judges I've seen, they've utilized that. And what I mean by that is not equal outcomes. It's just equal treatment. I can handle being treated with a different outcome than someone else as long as I had my day to be heard and as long as I was considered as an individual. I can deal with a harsher consequence if I, through my actions, deserve a harsher consequences. But if I get a harsher consequence and you didn't even bother to let me be heard and I was treated through the process unequally, then I cannot accept a different outcome. So the only way to deal with different outcomes is to make sure unequal results still came from equal treatment, because that's what equal justice means. It's equal treatment, not necessarily equal judgment. And it doesn't mean everybody goes to jail or everybody is, let free. It just means that people are treated equally regardless of the outcome. And so for re-entering citizens, what I would say is those three things: educate yourself, don't give up, and try to find some use of technology. Maybe you could be, the next billionaire. There's no degree requirement to educating yourself. So
Thank you, Judge. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to us. And I want sometime in the future to have you back so that we can just, again, candidly talk and answer and ask some good questions. For those of you that are watching us, we thank you. Any questions you have, please give them to me or Julius Hall, and we will, when we get the judge back, ask these questions. For those of you returning citizens, be encouraged. As he states, continue to tell your story, because your story is the impetus to encourage others to tell their stories as well. Again, we may have started this thing out wrong, but look at us now. We are finishing strong and changing the narrative. We love you. Good night. See you next Friday.